Good morning, everyone. Who have joined us today. Can I just get an indication if you can all hear me just by a raise of thumbs? Can you just indicate if you can hear me? Okay, thank you. So we'll proceed with the session and the others can join us along the way. Good morning again to everyone and welcome to another workshop with the Research Capacity Development Unit at the University of Johannesburg. And today's workshop is titled Values and Challenges of Interdisciplinary Research. My name is Kokezo and I will be your moderator for today's session. And I would firstly just like to notify you that the session is being recorded and I have already clicked on the recording button. And I would just like to start off by, thanking our attendees for taking the time to join us on this session today. And most importantly, I would like to thank our presenter, Dr. Sizwe Mkwanazi, for his effort with preparing and giving this presentation today. Before I can officially introduce Dr. Mkwanazi to you, I would like to just remind us of the housekeeping rules and some important information. So if for the housekeeping rules, if you do have questions during the presentation, please raise your hand if you would like to speak. Alternatively, you can type your question in the chat box. I will then indicate to the presenter to address your question. And as I have already mentioned, that the session is being recorded and the presentation slides will be requested from the presenter, and both the recording and the slides will be uploaded on our RCDMS by the end of the week. And also, after the workshop, please visit the RCDMS to complete the feedback survey for this particular workshop, and a certificate of attendance will automatically be generated for you to download. And please note that if you do not complete the feedback survey, you will not be able to get the certificate of attendance. So please complete the feedback survey and the certificate of attendance will be generated. You can download it for your record. Without further ado, I will then introduce our presenter, Dr. Sizwe Mkwanazi, by reading out his bio. So Dr. Sizwe Mkwanazi is a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg in the Department of Business Management. He lectures business management, global sustainability, operations management, and supervises postgraduate research. He is an emerging researcher in education, sustainability, and cooperative entrepreneurship. He links these areas through various studies focusing drawing on the broader literatures on structure and agency. He supervises master's degree research and is a co-editor of the Koopstar project. He completed a supervision qualitative research course at UJ, an advanced quantitative research course at Oxford, and a supervisor training program at Rhodes University. He is a 2017 Rhodes Scholar and a 2015 Mandela Rhodes Scholar. I will then hand over to Dr. Mkwanazi to take us through the workshop. Over to you, Doc.
Thank you, Koketso, for the introduction and a very good morning to everyone here. So I will share my presentation briefly, and also reflect on the thematic focus that has been given to me, which is value and challenges of interdisciplinary research. I did my DPhil at Oxford and in education, not in business management, as shown on the bio, I would like to think. So it is that kind of a background then that I'm trying to introduce or to share with the participants today, how one transcends fields or one can operate in an interdisciplinary context, education, business management, and those kinds of, expositions into how we do our research and how we conduct our research. So that is, I think, my reasoning or my rationale for having taken this invitation to talk about value and challenges of interdisciplinary research. Well, I mean, if one thinks about what we should then cover in such a discussion, or a workshop model, would be to definitely look at interdisciplinary research. What is it? The challenge of it. So I use my PhD experiences is one of the most big recent projects I've had to do to then unpack this whole idea of interdisciplinary research. And then I look at one glaring challenge, which is usually the methodological issue when it comes to interdisciplinary research. And interestingly, this comes when we have not even resolved the problem with mixed methods research, which is often, confused with a lot of things that it is not. But here again, we sit with a question around methodological challenges in doing interdisciplinary research. As I say that I use my PhD experience as a framework for this workshop discussion, is that then I look at fieldwork. How do you design for interdisciplinarity? And then the question of value. So then where do we derive it? Where does it come from? So we'll talk about that, and then maybe later have an opportunity or a space for reflection. So take into account that you could have invited a very experienced professor to sort of have this conversation, but I think the good thing of inviting someone who is only emerging is that then you are able to um, treat the challenges or even the value in a very granular form, that is not polished or too clinical, if you'd like to use that expression. You really focus on it as it is, as it has just happened, and you look at really what then the issues are with interdisciplinary research. So the photo you see on the side is not a decoration of my presentation. Yesterday, later, I actually went on to ChatGPT edition number 5, which is one that I'm subscribed on. And I asked ChatGPT and say, what do you think about interdisciplinary research? And then tells me a lot of things, of course, as you know, that ChatGPT and his or her brothers and their brothers um, have something to say all the time. So you ask DeepSeek, DeepSeek has so much to say as well. But I said, okay, why don't you generate a visualization of interdisciplinary? And then this is what it produced, okay? So correctly so, try to have some representation in terms of how society is structured, how people in society are viewed. So it definitely produced this. But what I found interesting about how ChatGPT, visualized this, and I asked the rationale to say why have you generated this kind of an image? So, but my initial assessment before that question was, so ChatGPT shows science, mathematics, computer equipment, creates this sense of interdisciplinary means, some kind of um, a specific science lab based practice. Okay. So but this reflects some biases around what interdisciplinary research looks like or what research is over other inquiries. So that's an interesting take that I think as we come into this presentation to think that we might unpack or even challenge some of what the assumption generally is around interdisciplinary research, or we might just confirm, what ChatGPT thinks it is. But at the moment, I'm convinced that, some understanding will be shared in this presentation. So, I will play this short clip. It's a minute long clip. Koketso and Lawrence, I'm sure you will help me here, but I will play and hope the sound goes through to the end or to the other side. So this is somebody who talks about interdisciplinary research at Open University in the UK. For those who know Open University, I mean, and its global footprint, has done a lot of amazing work around interdisciplinary research. But before I even explain what is interdisciplinary research, I just want to play for you this short clip so to get a different or a perspective before we start, drilling into our own or the perspective of this workshop.
I think there's no sound. You should open the sound from your side. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Doc, there's no sound. I think maybe you should, when you shade, maybe you can share with sound.
Okay. Let me do that. Share with sound. I think there's share. Yeah, click the button. Okay, let's go and see if now something comes up. Okay, thank you for that, Jay.
Yes, perfect. We can hear it now.
One of the distinguishing features of the research that we do is its interdisciplinary character. It is socially engaged and impactful. One of the achievements of the SRA and also of this research stream is to bring researchers together from a whole wide range of disciplines. So we look at these phenomena through sociology, psychology, legal studies, the arts, cultural studies, geography, and this really brings a very particular strength to the research that we do. It enables us to undertake cutting-edge research. We also have experience of partnering with organizations outside of the higher education and research sector. So this is NGOs, local governments, national governments, EU institutions, and other institutions. And that is really important for ensuring that the research we undertake looks at real-life situations and improves the lives of real people. Other partnerships we do is across sectors with the media and arts, and that helps us to gain a much broader perspective that, again, it is possible to translate into research findings that will make a difference to people's lives. Our researchers have looked at diverse areas, such as how we can use creative writing to address trauma and post-traumatic experiences for education and in conflict zones for refugees. We've also looked at how refugees use digital media on their often dangerous journeys. Another project looked at migrant families and how they build citizenship and belonging for themselves and their children. So really it is this wide range of research topics, but also the interdisciplinary collaborations that help us to ensure that our work is insightful and also really at the cutting edge of research.
So that is briefly, the experience of interdisciplinary research at Open University. So if one then comes to think about what sort of strata or categories of research really exist, we've got at least about 4 main and a lot of others that have emerged, transdisciplinary and others. So, but for the purposes of this workshop discussion, I mean, I want to just touch on a few which Velda Elliott at the Oxford Department of Education had, he speaks about quite a lot. One is the pure research. So here, the aim is to expand knowledge. So you seek no immediate application, philosophy and other, knowledge, I would say, fields concerned about expansion of knowledge and thinking or thought, they would focus on that kind of research. And then multidisciplinary would be more about researching alongside other research projects. So I'll give an example of the COVID-19 pandemic. When it emerged, I mean, some were researching on the effect of the infection itself. So that's the science of disease control. But on the other part, you had people looking at the implications of COVID on education, for example. But these people are concerned about a similar problem. They are not working on it together, but they are just working alongside. We understand you are looking at it from an education point of view. This other person is looking at it and they are doing independent studies, independent projects that are looking at the same problem. I mean, at times you'd find that people work in the same institutions, they work on the same process. So the alongsideness can be affected by proximity, being closer to each other, even though you are not doing anything, as one project, but your problem or your concern is the same. Whilst interdisciplinary, which we are talking about today, is an integrated approach bringing together different fields and theories. So you adopt what we call an expansive thinking, where these scholars sit together, they work on the same project. If they are going to write a paper, they are going to write the paper together. So it then requires that you expand and open up your thinking about another field. So, for example, one of the fields that has since emerged is the engineering education field. Myself and another professor, we wrote a paper on engineering education at UJ, and we presented it at a conference. But the whole point was, thinking from an engineering point of view, what does education mean? But then what does it mean on an identity of a student who's going through university? But we working on this together. This professor takes the perspective of education. As I specialize in education, he then I also take into account the engineering component of such an education, which he has a good understanding of. So with that, that's then the bringing together of these fields and theories. So it's less working alongside, but is really drawing in understandings of researchers and transcending a little your field, moving a little bit beyond your own field and trying to understand another field, but expanding your thinking. So this new phenomenon of expansive thought, where you go beyond and you start seeing things holistically than through just one lens. So that is interdisciplinary, the integratedness or the integrated approach to interdisciplinarity. Then we have applied and action research, which has since gained a lot of attention as well, because it borrows a lot from interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. So applied and action research seeks to solve an immediate problem whilst creating new knowledge. So these is associated very much with pragmatic scholars, people who are embedded with their fields, people who are activists also in their fields, and they document and write their experiences. They are reflexive in their approach, but also they change things or they test things in real context and really document that as knowledge. So all these stratas of research, all these strata of research, it basically talks to how research has its own category or identity, and how then this spills over to the identity of a researcher. Now, I mean, the question of reflection here, which we'll do on Menti later, is a question that I would like you to hold to mind, or to think about as we go through. That is, if you look at your own ideas, where would you place them, in terms of the four types, or the four category types of research? And why would you do that? Because people find a lot of reasons why they would say they take an interdisciplinary approach to research, or they are more action based. Some feel that there can be a feeling of you are attracted to a particular category type of research. Okay. um, but maybe you don't belong there if you were to look at your research. But I mean, for someone who is a research student, still coming up, you may also be thinking more about what sort of research or type of research would you want to be doing over time. So this is also a good moment of reflection and thinking, or making that kind of decision in the process, to say, so what do you think then would most identify with your particular interest, and why would you do that? So we will try to explore why then, I mean, interdisciplinary research could be interesting or could be something to consider. Interdisciplinary research, by its nature, or by how it takes place, or how it evolves within an academic institution or an independent research institution, it is premised on a few things. One, it is collaborative, so it calls for people to collaborate. So it is not one of those projects where you can work on alone and then send another person a paper and say, add your content here, add your perspective here. It really is consultative. So you sit around, you discuss, you brainstorm with your partners, your collaborators. But if you are working on it alone, again, you must somehow be open to bouncing around ideas with other people, so to gain fresh perspective. It's team driven, as I've already indicated. So if you belong to a center, a school, as we've seen, for example, on the Open University example, that this is a collective of people. So no one claims to know all fields or all disciplines. You are saying, I know my discipline, but I think the other discipline, like psychology, legal studies, when you study trauma, you want to bring such people as the colleagues at the SRA at Open University are saying. Then you bring the guys who understand technology, then you sit around the table to say, but what happens in this context of trauma based on your fields? And these things, they melt together through a team that, would want to drive such a collaborative interdisciplinary project. Now, the other thing with interdisciplinary research is that it focuses on depth, because every field will want to have an expression in the project. Whilst some people think, oh no, you end up being shallow simply because each field does not enjoy length, etc. But what you miss when you think like that is that what matters, or what is most important, would be covered from a different discipline perspective. So if you are working on trauma, the person covering legal will cover the most important. But this becomes interwoven. It becomes one. It reads as one research output piece. So you won't even, when you read some of these interdisciplinary studies, reports or papers, you can't even tell that now I'm reading about law, now I'm reading about psychology, now I'm reading, because it comes at the perfect time. It tells a holistic story. And then in doing so, then you derive and you get depth. You move to something more powerful about the problem being investigated or the phenomenon in question. You move from being concerned about This is not how we write in legal studies. This is not how we write in social work or in development study. You really drill into the issue or the subject area that is being investigated. And then it offers researchers learning opportunities. I mean, as already alluded, you draw from other people. Okay, so if it's engineering education, you draw from others. So if you're an educationist like myself, then you have some engineer. You really build bridges of sharing and learning from the other person. So it by its nature, interdisciplinary assumes that the researcher is a learner. The researcher learns. The researcher can be taught. The researcher does not know it all. So there's exchange of knowledge between researchers themselves, which is something we don't always do, because every researcher knows, they say, I know my field. I'm very good in my field. You can't really tell me about this field. I'm an expert in it. But in interdisciplinary research, you become less successful if you don't learn from your colleagues or peers or collaborate. But the other guys who have done amazing work on interdisciplinary research, I will point to two, Xia and Yu, which are scholars in the Chinese institutions. I mean, I've read their work quite a bit, but their work has gone beyond, the borders of China. If you check it out on Elsevier and the other databases. So they say interdisciplinary research is generally considered the best way to solve complex problems in current scientific research. So theirs is a very critical view of, pure research. They say, well, look, pure research in itself has problems because if it's not interdisciplinary, how do you confirm that the findings it generates are indeed true? So they think of interdisciplinary research as a test of validity for some of the assumptions that are made. Now, I'll go back to the COVID-19 pandemic, and do pardon me here because I'm going at it roughly. COVID-19 pandemic, when it hit the soils of the African continent, East Asia as well, people resorted to traditional medicine. Although this was diagnosed as a Western medical problem. So these guys, basically, their argument here is to say, what happens in such a context? So you have a complex problem. Can you really solve it by saying, we will look to research that studies the pandemic through a Western lens, okay, or a research that takes, Aboriginal medicines into account, So that was the challenge that COVID-19 basically presented. But if you think then about this argument they present to say interdisciplinary research can solve such, especially in the current scientific research issues. So that's what interdisciplinary research does, or did at least, for some scholars who said, look, let's come together and study this phenomenon of curing or helping people recover from COVID-19 infection. Whether you study the Western medicine or you are studying other medicinal plants or in an Aboriginal sense. So that is the power of interdisciplinarity. You don't just study alongside, you come together and sort of melt your ideas or put your ideas in a melting pot. It's very hard to do some of that, but it challenges some of the egos that exist amongst researchers. So those are the kinds of things that we have to think about. But going further on, another person would want to question and say, but what more? So in addition to that, they further argued, Shoyu and Shia says interdisciplinary research is about formation of a team, which I touched on early. So it's teamwork. So it can hurt egos of someone who, if you generally like, to work alone, and to someone who likes their own ideas more than the other, it's part of research journeys. But if you can work with other people or find supervisors that involve you in their projects, involve you in their initiatives. It's even better for interdisciplinary studies. So researchers also then working as a team, they explore disciplines. So you must be interested in exploring more than one discipline so that there's no dominance from the other. Because the problem with other forms of research is that they usually gets to be dominance. So if we are doing a multidisciplinary research project, you may find that other people enjoy dominance than others. But interdisciplinary says we come together and we focus on the most important out of our fields. Because when you do that, some fields are able to amplify others. Okay. Then last but not least is looking at a South African study titled Negotiating Leadership in Interdisciplinary Co-Productive Research, a case study of an international community-based project between collaborators from South Africa and United Kingdom. So this is a Sage Open case study that was published just studying how people collaborated. So under what was called a leaderful project. So leaderful simply means we don't lack leaders in an interdisciplinary research team. No one leads the other. We all operate equally, within our expertise, and we bring it in as required and as needed. Okay. So this just was one of those case studies that were a reflection of how people work in an interdisciplinary space, negotiating leadership. So there is no leadership, but whatever leadership that exists is negotiated. So meaning at every given point, we know who must lead now, who must take a lead on this part. Okay, now we are talking about education. This person will take lead. Okay, now we are talking about engineering. This person will take lead. That kind of navigation, is very important in interdisciplinary. But the question still borders around, are researchers ready for such? Do researchers value that? When you sit with your research supervisor, do you feel they would be willing to let you lead on a front that they do not understand? Would you truly, emerge interdisciplinary in your field? Well, that can be tested, or questions can be asked. So, at this point, then it's another reflection and stop point where I would say maybe take a minute to, and think really, what was your experience of working with people outside your field of expertise? It could be at work, could be within your research or any other type of projects. So I will pause a bit here. I mean, I don't want you to shout to the call, but really I want us to take a moment of reflection at this particular point, just for 60 seconds, and we then move on from here onward.
And therefore, John Fletcher did not get his way. John Fletcher will come here and make a good contract. That I was not very pleased with what he attempted to do at the time.
Palisa, I see your mic is muted. Do you perhaps have a comment or question? Okay. We have a hand from Joyce. You may unmute and maybe ask a question or comment.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Nkwanazi, and what a insightful explanation on interdisciplinary research. I'm just listening to you, and I think I know everything that you are trying to put forward here in terms of interdisciplinary, because I'm one big fan of multidisciplinary or collaboration. I've been doing it for quite some time now, in as much as we may not have a lot of written published papers, because we were doing it at undergraduate level. But I would definitely say that my experience in terms of working with people outside my field of expertise has been very educational and eye-opening, because I've also had an opportunity to work with engineering when we were doing digital ambassadors in Joburg. We also used to have Green Week at FADA with the final year students, and we would group them into multidiscipline groups where students would go out, do a needs assessment for, different companies, because research and development is very important in companies. So if you go the multidisciplinary approach, you are actually allowing the opportunity that people in companies do not work in silos. They are working towards common goals, common objectives. Their KPIs, individual KPIs can only be achieved, and you rely on somebody else to give you the work so that you can continue with your own work. So when you go to research and development departments, that's where you will find that for a product to be produced, it needs the input of all the people. I'll make an example. We had a lecturer or a professor from Namib University. They wanted to establish, since there is a lot of children that are abducted and sold elsewhere in the world, he came up with the idea of a chip that you can actually insert under a thumb. But some people had cultural reservations. Some people said, no, the privacy of the child. So I think that's where engineering realized that you cannot make decisions alone in terms of research. You actually have to collaborate with other people, because you may be coming up with a very brilliant product, but only to find that it's against certain religions, it's against certain cultures, or legislation does not allow that. If someone says you have a right to your body, no one can, there is a whole lot. So I think that's where most of these multidisciplinary comes in, because certain things you cannot do on your own. At the end of the day, we don't just do research for the sake of research. We do research because we want to solve specific problems, and specific problems are actually dissected into different disciplines, and they are influencing different disciplines. So the part where you actually have to work with other people, you understand things that you never thought. The one takeaway that I would say I gained from working with people outside my discipline is that you come in as experts. No one is better than the other. So they regard you as an expert in your own field. You are also paying your all attention to the other fields, because if I am speaking as an expert in business and another one in, for instance, I was working with industrial engineering, graphic designers, you're working with visual arts, you are working, and when you critique something, you would be very mindful of the fact that that person is talking from that particular discipline and they are an expert in that particular discipline. So, and then we had the experience of also working on a project, Common Good First, with universities from Europe, where you write papers, you write reports about social economy, and there was quite a lot of different disciplines, and you see the approach is quite interesting. So I think this is quite a good topic, and at the university we really need to start focusing on working with other disciplines, not in isolation, because sometimes our findings get to be criticized because they don't address certain things within the other disciplines. You might be coming up with a brilliant idea only to find that it's not acceptable in other disciplines. Thank you.
You are muted, Dr. Mkonazi.
Thank you, Dr. Nimalo, for the feedback. And thank you, Koketso. Yes, indeed. I think one of the biggest challenges, as you highlight them, is also understanding then that interdisciplinary means teams. So the major challenge, as I will highlight also later, is how do you, and I've mentioned this, how do you move beyond your little corner ego? Because research, or the identity of a researcher over time has become a trade ticket that sometimes, borders around a particular ego or being known in a particular space. So some of that, is still I'd say a human challenge to interdisciplinary research, but truly, as you've rightly reflected, Dr. Numalo, is that all of these, approaches to research that value interdisciplinarity stand a great chance of persuading, convincing, and moving people to some form of action. But when we lack an interdisciplinary account, and if we're trying to solve complex problems, we become victims of criticism that says, well, you didn't account for another dimension to the problem. So sorry, your research ends here. So that's the kind of a thing. But what other amazing thing with interdisciplinary research as I move on from here is that if more research was becoming or taking a more of an interdisciplinary approach on various levels, somehow we would find each other on a lot of things. So it would mean research over time starts connecting more and more, so meaning those who are arguing about crime, others arguing about education. And then if you start seeing these big picture projects or big picture issues getting more and more connected, even the kind of big picture solution becomes more clarified over time. So that's just an interesting way for also promoting and thinking more about interdisciplinarity. Now, I share my experience of a PhD study that I did over quite a number of years. So my study was titled The Conceptions of Entrepreneurship Amongst University Students. So you're dealing with what I would think is a commerce sort of subject area, and you're bringing a purely humanities, social sciences, background to it, and a bit of political science in it. So this is just a demonstration for a student who's saying, well, I'm working alone. How do I take a interdisciplinary approach to my work and bring that up? So, but I was lucky to work with two supervisors, which one is an anthropologist and another one was a professor in skills development. So with that all, we brought it together and we asked a simple question, yet a very complicated question, that says, what different conceptualizations of entrepreneurship do South African university students articulate? Okay, so what do they say is entrepreneurship? When you meet a South African student, university student, what will they say is entrepreneurship? And then we further this by asking sub-questions to say, how do they relate these to their own livelihood strategies? And how do these differ from those promoted by universities and policymakers? So what the study was trying to do was to hold banners and say, well, on one hand, students are saying something. For me, entrepreneurship is having my YouTube channel that has so many followers. I'm able to produce so much content. Then when I do that, I'm an entrepreneur. Okay. Then on one hand, this student says, but my life is supported by NSFAS. I send money home. So this is my way of living. So I live by also getting other things happening around my life. I get gigs, jobs there and there. I'm a DJ on weekends, etc. So that life and a livelihood. And then we then say, okay, let's study policy now. So universities also have this idea of, okay, student entrepreneurs must register their ideas with our TTO offices. Then those we think are student entrepreneurs. Policymakers are saying, those who create jobs in the economy, we want our students to graduate, and as this is a common phrase, so they can become employers and not job seekers, job creators versus job seekers. Now, that's the question. So, but that's for someone who, would want to give this a thought, to say this is a study that is asking a lot of things. Okay, so someone else would say, no, you can't research like that. So it depends on where you do your research project. Okay, so at this juncture, we had agreed that, look, we are going full blown to explore in disciplines, in an interdisciplinary approach. So to answer these questions, we adopted what we would call a multi-level case study analysis, where we're looking at insights from policymakers, university staff, students at a South African university. And we carefully selected our site, being a university that at least has 80% of students who are from low income backgrounds. Now that, we tested using various statistical reports that we received, which would show which universities are bringing students from a lower quintile, and what does lower quintile mean, and all that kind of stuff. So that's nature and structure, or nature of structure and approach in an interdisciplinary PhD study. But if you broaden this now, you think about a theoretical approach, and I call it expansive approach. So the expansive approach is gaining a lot of attention. I saw a good colleagues from WITS talking a lot about expansive approach over the past weeks, to say research that does not connect, to other big picture issues. When we say big picture, saying, it can't be that research still goes through to its own path and whole, and ignores everything else, that is big picture, like health, gender-based violence, student issues, and other issues that really are big picture. So you would want to challenge, research that is interdisciplinary to take an expansive approach. So we adopted then a theoretical framing on structure and agency theory. So those I supervise also know that I challenge them to think a little bit about structure and agency. Over time, different theories take precedence, but I think to some extent, we are in an era of asking questions around structure and agency. So we look at subversion, reproduction, and self-regulation as questions around whether can a university student entrepreneur, exercise themselves fully. Can you fully exercise your entrepreneurial identity, for example? Or can you exercise entrepreneurship in its fullest articulation? So if you say being an entrepreneur for you, it means running a successful, as I've explained earlier, successful podcast. Are you able to exercise yourself fully in that sense in the university, as the university promotes entrepreneurship? So we exposed higher, so we were exposed here to some disciplines such as higher education, student development, okay, technology, policy, and the list goes on and on. But you hold these together. So in designing the study, then we looked at which source documents do you work with at the level of policy. So we looked at the NDP, the National Youth Policy, interviews with these different figures. Then the variety of participants becomes important if you are designing an interdisciplinary study. So here you think of who would enrich my study. Now, with every project, there is some bias that is there when you select participants. So if you choose participants that will echo what you already think is happening, the interdisciplinary today is put on question. Because remember, interdisciplinary, it means you have people from other fields who may want other perspectives to be accounted for. Even when you design with your supervisor who takes an interdisciplinary approach, they most likely will push you around to say, well, think more broadly. I was pushed because I had already determined my sample as students who have already started businesses or enterprises or who already are enterprises. But my supervisor said, look, think more of someone who is dealing with an intention they are thinking of, someone who is not an entrepreneur, a student who says, I'm not, and this is what I think entrepreneurship is. Because they said, even the person who is not an entrepreneur, they have a perspective, they have a reason why not. Okay, maybe they think a certain way about the funding situation, they are thinking a certain way about other opportunities that exist. So I was broadened up in that sense to say, you provide a variance or you take a variety when you deal with your methodology, and especially when you think about your participants. So making sense of the findings, I mean, I'm drawing this really from an extended abstract of my thesis. So the findings explore the different student understandings of entrepreneurship and responses to their university's promotion of entrepreneurship in this context. So lack of cash, poverty, hardship are the socioeconomic issues dominating their understandings and responses to entrepreneurship. The students struggle to afford basics such as clothes, toiletries, food, and textbooks, despite their NSFAS funding. This funding is not enough to meet all their needs. For some students, this justifies an interest in entrepreneurship. The findings highlight the differences and tensions in the conceptualizations, understandings, and articulations of entrepreneurship amongst students, policy, and the university. So a detailed case study of one student, Kat, offers further insights on how students subvert policy and their university structure in actioning their micro enterprises. Now, this is I found it interesting that my findings, came to something like this, because in my mind, I had this picture of, well, look, this is a university promoting entrepreneurship. Probably how I'm going to do this project, I'm just going to look at how the university promotes entrepreneurship. Students, take it or leave it. Thank you. You should take entrepreneurship if you like, because your university already promotes it. So I was gonna go on a route. If I was looking at just entrepreneurship as my study field, I feel I would have gone on a tandem of saying students are maybe not taking full advantage of entrepreneurship opportunities. I would have ignored hardship. I would have ignored the true reality of students, because this is more from the fees must fall literature. Now, when you are an interdisciplinarian, you don't ignore that. You don't run away, but you find a sensible way of integrating your research study such that you account for the loose ends. But the tendency of other research is, I mean, I read other papers which I critique on my literature, where people, when they start looking for consultancy jobs with the state, you write your research studies in such a way that the state will give you contracts because you are a promoter of entrepreneurship. One paper I read which does this said students are simply over dependent on the state. They are they are being entitled or something like that. I can't even articulate the paper properly because of how saddening such a paper was. But it enjoys a lot of citations from those who say, well, we think entrepreneurship is the way to go. If you don't do entrepreneurship, you are you are just entitled, you are over dependent. But such research does not take account of how such statements can be responsibilizing, can be placing a responsibility on the poor to solve problems of the state. Okay. Well, someone may critique me and say, oh no, but everyone must do something for themselves. But if you do interdisciplinary research, you are not dismissive. You are not dismissing that through entrepreneurship, someone who, may lack cash will most probably improve their situation. So you don't dismiss that. But you're also saying, look, if there is access, policies that promote access to finance through banks or micro lending that supports businesses, then that person who pursues entrepreneurship, then they're even better. They are at a better chance of making success. So you are saying here, the system must not grind you twice. You mustn't be poor, and as a poor person, you take your last money, you start a business, but by starting a business, you lose all of it because there's no microfinancing for you in the system. So the system punishes you twice. It punishes you for being poor and punishes you for starting a business, which by it you are trying to get out of poverty. But that's interdisciplinary research that does that. Research that is pure and saying, wow, entrepreneurship is going to be this life-saving thing. If you don't do it, you probably are entitled. Is the one that brings even entrepreneurship to its detriment. So much that once you raise the word entrepreneurship to some people, they feel like, okay, here's another person again, saying we are not doing enough when we are already doing so much in the name of entrepreneurship. So that's the interesting thing with interdisciplinary approach, where in this my PhD study, I looked at these different fields. As I have said, I looked, yes, at entrepreneurship as a field, but I looked at higher education as a field. What is higher education? Because we can't just say entrepreneurship belongs to higher education. We've got to probe it and qualify it before we can say, okay, this is how entrepreneurship belongs in higher education. I mean, there are people, Joyce Newman here, Dr. Joyce Newman is doing a lot of work on this, but you then realize over time how such a thing gets hijacked and it's no longer what it was. But interdisciplinary research then clarifies these hijackings of entrepreneurship, blah, 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 all these well-meaning things. Okay, so you are doing good research on COVID, how COVID could be cured using traditional medicines, etc. But over time, if we don't do interdisciplinary research, then say, who are these people who derive these traditional medicines? Where are they coming from? How did they end up in this space when for so long they were pushed to the sides? And when we don't do research in that sense or make holistic sense out of it, then we lose this whole idea of it, why we were doing it in the first place, why were we bringing this thing in the first, and then it gets hijacked or it gets taken up. But interdisciplinarity grounds us, makes us grounded, makes us question why we do things the way we do them. Now, the last element here is then, how do you derive value, or how did, for example, I derive value out of my PhD study, a thesis in particular, which I really enjoy very much. So it's more on framing the contribution. So you must frame the contribution. So in my case, this is basically, I write that the contribution of this thesis is a demonstration of how students at university are using agency to subvert the rigid policy promotions of entrepreneurship, and this is contrast this with the lived experiences of students. Theoretically, the thesis contributes to literature, a firm confirmation on how entrepreneurship is conceptualized and practiced differently in society. Okay, so that's a contribution you make. So I made here to say, look, if you want to understand how entrepreneurship is done, you must understand that it's done differently by different people. So meaning our students, not all of them are going to create a tech startup. They are not. Whether you want to register that in a TTO of some sort, but not all of them are going to do that. Some of them I showed on my thesis through, cases and photography. As I mean, I was supervised by an anthropology who insists that you produce image evidence of your claim if you can. So I did that, but I showed that some of the students were doing service delivery projects where they install pipes, they install sewer, systems in villages where none of this thing existed. So who could have imagined that? But if we adopt a fundamentalist thought, thinking about entrepreneurship, we start also dictating which business ideas you must do. These students, some of them were doing mobile somatology services where they go to your house and do you massages and all that. So this has accounted for that, but others are saying, look, I just sell chickens. Me being a student, it means that I can't sell chickens. There's lots of money there. I grow chickens, I sell them with my family. My family lives in poverty. But because of this idea, the fact that I can promote these chickens, we are making a lot of money actually. The fact that I ensure that this thing is run well. My value addition as a student is that I ensure the books make sense, the money is accounted for. So that's the kind of thinking. But the Silicon Valley type thought on entrepreneurship has been that if it's not a tech startup, it's probably not entrepreneurship. But my thesis clarified this problem to say, no, wait, the differences matter. Okay. From an interdisciplinary PhD study, I have demonstrated, I show how these differences matter. So it's okay for someone to be a techie person. Excellent. A tech brilliant somebody exists in these campuses of our universities. They are there. They must be supported. So my argument then was, or my contribution was, if you account for interdisciplinarity, you realize that fundamentally these people really, what they are doing, they are exercising their agency. They are exercising their freedom. Entrepreneurship must be the freedom that it claims it is. It cannot, therefore, be a priority. So if somebody is looking for funding at the NYDA cannot then say, well, we won't fund you because you are going to start a chicken farm. Well, what the NYDA should perform a test that is fair to that idea to say, so if you are to be successful on growing 50 chickens monthly or producing 150 chicken per quarter, what is that going to look like? And how is success looking like in a tech startup in this? So my thesis was really arguing that you must be able to create space for holding together the differences. So these people are different. We're going to give them a fair chance. Last but not least, so my study then looks at a social justice perspective to entrepreneurship and education. So again, reflecting the interdisciplinary nature of the study. So the thesis rattles the cage of entrepreneurship literature that has since adopted a one-sided approach to the phenomenon, as it amplifies the voice of students, both from a political and from a standpoint of advocacy. It questions the state's popularization and promotion of entrepreneurship in South African higher education, whilst not accommodating the varying conceptions and motives, practices of entrepreneurship amongst students. This thesis proposes a three-legged transformative model for entrepreneurship. The model suggests that entrepreneurship be treated with a more transformative lens and from a livelihood perspective in both research and policy. So that was, it's how I sort of tied together the whole, PhD thesis argument and say, okay, but what must come out of this? To say, if then you were to think in an interdisciplinary manner, you're thinking of this three-legged transformative model, which I'll tell you about it one day. But one of the elements of it there is an element of Ubuntu, basically, to say, so how do you practice Ubuntu through entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurship? So you can't support entrepreneurship among students who are poor, who lack cash, who depend on NSFAS, but your priority, or you do not have a value of Ubuntu in doing that, because here you are lending a helping hand, and I explain how a cooperative enterprise model is even more suited in supporting such an effort, to if the state really is serious about using entrepreneurship to curb poverty, it has to do it in a more transformed way. But if not, then it may have to come out to say, look, for us, entrepreneurship is a capitalist program. If you have the money, if you don't have the money, stay out of it. The rich must play in entrepreneurship. Then I would accept that, but I would not accept a state saying, well, this using entrepreneurship to transform people's lives, but you grind and you consume and you break down the very people that you say you want to make or help become entrepreneurs. Now we are closing off. I mean, we are coming to some form of a close, but I would want, as we go through, to say, well, having heard me talking about my PhD thesis as an example, would you say interdisciplinary appeals to you? Because someone may do a study on banking, the effectiveness of banking services for South African customers. Good point. But you would find that the study is it looks just at banking as a business case, and a case that must make the banks richer and richer. In a society that is battling inequality, rising inequality, the banks are siphoning a lot of money. The banks are colluding, increasing rates. So how do you then become a voice of reason, through your research in such a context? So really, interdisciplinarity is activism in its own right, as you've heard from the presentation done by, the video clip that we played earlier. So also, we can reflect honestly on what challenges, from just listening through, what are these challenges of doing interdisciplinary research? So, well, interdisciplinary research, then, if you think about it as a challenge, it requires collaboration. I mean, people think collaboration, or we tend to think as people that, oh, well, collaboration is this nice thing, when we meet on the sidelines of a conference. Everybody thinks, oh, well, we're going to collaborate. Here's my business card. Look, that's not collaboration. Collaboration is actually doing the thing. It's doing the thing together, setting aside time, meeting, writing. I mean, I worked on a collaborative project on a book being published by Routledge at the moment, called The Diaries of Cooperatives. So it's just tough, because the work goes back. The editors don't want this. You still have to work together. You still have to defend your ideas or promote some of your ideas, and be willing to be vulnerable in the process. So willing to, you must find mentors that are willing, willing research mentors, academic supervisors that value expansive thinking, willing to think and research beyond your field. So there's the obsession with our fields, but I'm lucky to be supervising or working in what is called the Master of Sustainability Management at UJ. We go as far as bringing core supervisors from mining, but this qualification sits with the Department of Business Management. We go as far as looking for people in geography to come and co-supervise with us, but it's not something common in our fields where we operate. People are really zoomed into their fields. So what then this does, it makes you care about big picture questions. Remember, your research, we must remember that our research, people will care about our research based on how much it talks to big picture questions. Well, big picture questions get manipulated over time. You find that suddenly a big picture question is AI. But that's really not the big picture question. The big picture question is the conditions of life, daily life for a lot of people, then of course health and other things. And then everybody will say AI in health, AI in this. But that I call a manipulation of a big picture question. So you must integrate it in such a way that interdisciplinary is integration, is not a mention. Is not to say, I just mention, say, oh, by the way, AI will, like those lazy recommendations at the end of a paper where everybody says the recommendation is training, is education, is uh, maybe to somebody making recommendations on unemployment, say, oh, maybe we must promote more entrepreneurship, make people become more. Well, I mean, that's not how you do interdisciplinary research. Interdisciplinary research is much greater than that. Is really an integrated approach to recommending or making solutions. Well, so I asked ChatGPT, a good friend here again, and I said, okay, well, what questions should we ask ourselves about interdisciplinary? To qualify whether something is indeed interdisciplinary. It says, okay, you must ask yourself, are multiple academics involved in that research process? Is knowledge from different disciplines integrated into a new framework or method or solution? So sometimes someone may say, but I mean, if I have one supervisor from either business management or some department somewhere, look, as a researcher, a postgraduate researcher, you can actually ask. You can ask and say, look, I would like someone to be my additional supervisor. I learned this after a long time because I got to this other UK university where I did my PhD. Then they said, okay, are you fine with us? I said, oh, that's interesting. Supervisors never ask that question because supervisors are like, oh, we are given to you. Then you have us for your life, until you are done here. That was really refreshing. But I discovered that also in the university, well, not that my discovery helps in any way, but I learned that, I mean, people can ask for supervisors and talk to people and say, please be my co-supervisor on a project. So it's something to think about. The also is asking, would the question be answered well, if I'm just working from a single discipline? And then are researchers collaborating throughout the project? So that's the most important thing. It's not just throwing around paragraphs, it's sitting around a table and discussing and refining these ideas and writing as you discuss. And then do you produce new knowledge that transcends individual disciplines? That's another test you must perform. I mean, without these questions answered, then it can be a bit of a challenge. Then fieldwork. The challenge when it comes to fieldwork or the implications is your participants can be sparse. It means you can find them in different places. So you must come in a fieldwork project of your study with an open mind. So more than one location. I mean, for my PhD, maybe to touch the location and the sparsity of participants, I went to as far as Kirinyaga in Kenya, to find my participants. I came to South Africa. Then I went online looking for my participants. I did quite a number of them online. I returned a few times in Kenya, Nairobi as well, to collect my data there, and then went back to the UK to process the data. Now, these are sometimes the demands of interdisciplinarity. But interdisciplinarity, the nice thing about it, it also it's research that is honest. It's research that appreciates the complexity of your field. But it also values new knowledge by how did you get new data. So if you read my thesis, you'll find that I talk a lot about, or I write a lot about how you do your research on WhatsApp. How can you do, your full-blown research study, collecting data on WhatsApp from people. So it changes or it transforms how we imagine doing research itself. Okay, so that is the power of interdisciplinarity, that you start looking at things differently. But I mean, it's because I had an anthropologist supervisor who said, oh, who said you can't really do data collection via WhatsApp? I mean, who said that? Because this is someone who works with observations, does a lot of work around thinking about how data is produced. Also, it can be team dependent. So you'd really need a good team, because this kind of research requires, teaming up and working together. Do expect some failed attempts or failed starts. That can also happen. Okay. Then our last short clip is from someone who's talking about resources. So it's a very resource-focused clip, which is also just 2 minutes to watch by someone at the Oxford Martin School of Sustainability.
Being in the Martin School has just made a huge difference to what we do. So in particular, I mean, everything we do is a collaboration between mathematical biologists like myself and clinicians like my co-director Rodney Phillips. And before the Oxford Martin School came along, we had worked together, we talked together a lot, but we'd never had any shared appointments. And since being part of the Oxford Martin School, we've had lots of people who we've co-supervised. We've done much, much more work together. And to be honest, that's because we've had shared funds. We've had money that was ours to spend together. And that means we've been able to hire people who come and worked on a project that was part maths, part biology, and that sort of thing. So it's made an enormous difference. We've written many, many more papers together. I think a lot of the things we've come to understand better have been because of that much closer working together. I really am a great believer in the Oxford Martin School's idea of interdisciplinary working. It's been, I think, enormously valuable for us. It's worked out very well. It's also been fantastic fun. Interdisciplinary work is great because you sit in this room with people from lots of different disciplines, and because of that, everybody's allowed to ask stupid questions. And I think it's enormously liberating. So you're no longer sitting there thinking, oh, I can't ask this question because I'm sure everybody else knows, because you're allowed to ask it because you're the biomathematician and they're the clinicians, and vice versa. And I think it makes for a terrific way to work, but also I think the returns are very rewarding. I think we find things out quicker, and I think we ask better questions. I know I ask better questions when I work with clinicians. I'd like to think that having me say, oh, I don't know about that, helps them ask better questions too.
Well, that's a very good clip from the Oxford Martin School of Sustainability, which basically emerged later as a result of, as Professor Angela explains it, as a result of interdisciplinary scholars who got funding, and they decided, oh, why don't we start our own unit here at the university and a school, as a, like instead of a department, just a school as part of the university, and continue our interdisciplinary work from the school. So showing that there are resources for interdisciplinary work, but more than anything, there's also what I would call, interdisciplinary is radical, is activism. So some people will actively do something such as setting up their own unit to work in an interdisciplinary manner, because a lot of people don't work in an interdisciplinary manner. People have different objectives why they do research the way they do. But when interdisciplinary researchers are intentional, they move together and start working together and build even things like schools together. I mean, I must commit and be honest that I ended up, building a joint institute with other, young academics or academics who think alike. And we set it up, and it's been working for 5 years now, where we try and push our interdisciplinary ideas and work together on those things. So value is in terms of output, journal articles, book chapters, events, conference proceedings, thesis, dissertation, and policy papers can come out of that. I mean, for me, that's my contribution, or that's the value I derived from, interdisciplinary research. My thesis, my PhD is a product of interdisciplinary work. So without that, I don't think I would have enjoyed a PhD experience that is without interdisciplinarity. So there are a lot of funding opportunities linked to interdisciplinary research. I mean, as already Professor Angela has alluded. So if framed well and discussed well with like-minded individuals, I mean, there's so much of that funding making rounds, for people studying happiness, for example, people doing some interesting work, with other interdisciplinary parties, collaborating with the arts, to explain some scientific facts. So that's the kind of thing that is emerging in terms of funding. Well, I have a Mentimeter for those who are interested in taking part, which has a code. It basically, if you go there, you will be reflecting on the questions that we've already asked, by way of multiple choice. So if you take them, I mean, I would be happy to share the result later after our Q&A or after the main discussions that we hope to have. But do take note of the code and the QR code that is on here. So I've come to the end, where the main thinking really is around collaborating, beyond your field, meeting people from all over. I'm in a project with 26 African authors. We wrote a book with UJ, which is with UJ Press at the moment, which focuses on the contribution of cooperative enterprises to sustainability in Africa. And yeah, I think asking important questions become part of interdisciplinary. So in interdisciplinary, we say, I am from law, this is the question I have. I am from engineering, this is the question I have. I'm from education, this is the question I have. Someone is from psychology, they have a question. Now, how do we condense that question into one important question? So that is the big value in interdisciplinarity, and you craft beyond qual or quantitative studies. So you use the most meaningful approach more than it is more about obsessing, okay, this is a quantitative study, this is a qualitative study. Well, it's good if people can easily decide that. Or nowadays people simply say, oh, well, I'm a quant person. Well, I'm a qual person. That's not the point, though. The point is more on what is the best method for the question being asked. So interdisciplinary really brings us down from our high horses. It makes us ask the important question. Thank you.
Dr. Mkwanazi, thank you very much for such an insightful presentation. I think most of the time the postgraduate students don't know that they need this information until they get this information and they see the value in it. So thank you very much. And I'm glad that we had this session so that the postgraduate students can get to understand, and as emerging scholars and academics, they can already plan how they can carry this out in their career. So I think this was very insightful, and I'm just going to give the opportunity to all the attendees to interact with Dr. Mkwanazi in the session. So any question, any comments that you may have, this is an opportunity for us to interact, and engage as much as we can. So all the mics have been enabled, so you can just unmute yourself and, contribute to the discussions and ask a question or comment as well. And I think to add on to what you have mentioned, Dr. Mkwanazi, about the values. So one of the values that you have mentioned, that it can actually it reaches a broader community. Your publications or your research outputs can actually reach a broader community, because most of the people in different disciplines and fields can actually relate to your publications. So I think that is a very good thing. And I see a comment from Abdullah saying that very insightful presentation. We have learned that combining different fields can lead to innovative solutions for complex problems. Definitely. Thank you, Doc. I totally agree with you, Abdullah. And we have a question from Dr. Numalo. You make not a question but a hand. Sorry. I don't know if it's a question or contribution. So please go ahead.
It's definitely a question to Dr. Mkwanazi. What an insightful presentation. Thank you very much, because I think from my side, you just open a lot of opportunities in my mind. Dr. Mkwanazi, from time to time, we are bombarded by a number of invitations to collaborate in research, especially in the Pan-African diaspora, and we don't know how to go about collaborating with other universities elsewhere in Africa in terms of promoting entrepreneurship. Do you maybe perhaps have maybe suggestions or ways of us as both academics and also PhD and master students on how we can tackle these opportunities together?
Thank you, Dr. Numalo. And I'll sort of answer this in two ways, for the benefit of all and to your direct question, and also for the consideration of the postgraduate school. So collaborating on the African, because in my experience, I've collaborated with the guys in Morocco as well as those in Kenya. And now, we are part of a project with others. The main thing with the African scholarship or collaborating with African scholars, is at times there is funding, but often than none, there is no funding. So what becomes a challenge is everyone waits, or there's this assumption we must wait for funding before we can. I would like to put it frankly to this workshop here, as you've asked, Dr. Numa, that actually the funding, you look for it for yourself. You really go out, find a sponsor. At times, I've had to fund from my own pocket little costs of meetings and and really focus on the project at hand than the structural issues. So much of what stops collaboration in the interdisciplinary research amongst African scholars is just the lack of funding for specific types of projects. So making it seem like, oh, well, some projects do not deserve funding. Or the funders at times, they have a pre-selected group of people that if we funded these, the funding is run out. So that has been a hold down for most interdisciplinary collaborative research projects. Then to your question more directly, MJ, is what I found helpful for students is for African colleagues I meet, I'll give one scenario with the International Cooperative Alliance Africa. So for those of us who are researching on co-op enterprises and sustainability, we bring students together on group supervision. So someone is at the University of Nairobi or Cooperatives University of Kenya, and myself, we bring the students together on a Zoom session and we write together. We raise resources to support students to attend conferences in different places. So my thinking at the moment is through minimum viable programs of action that we collaborate. If our minimum viable program is setting up quarterly supervision webinars then we do that. Or if ours is writing policy briefs together, then we do that. So it's more on the minimum viable program of action more than it. Usually the thinking is that collaboration is about funding, we're going there, we sitting in a nice hotel or place. Well, if you have a funder that is willing to do that, great, paying for your publications. Sometimes there's no money to pay for cost of editing these publications. So what you end up with is, as I've mentioned on my deriving value statement, was sometimes you write policy brief, you brief policy, that costs nothing. You write briefs to the parliamentary committees on issues of importance. Well, it may not count as research output as in the traditional form, but that is output, that is derived from these arrangements. So our African scholars are not as privileged as the South African scholars in terms of funding access, being funded by the likelihood of your institution funding your interdisciplinary venture. But they still do a lot. So that's where we sit. And I think my small contribution to your question, Mamche, is that of we can collaborate through minimum viable programs to say, this is really what we want to do. Once that is defined, the way is, a way is created. And if we say, this is a project we want to pursue, you want to study, just make a rough example, study whether entrepreneurship contributes to happiness in Africa, or we want to map where most of entrepreneurship startup funding is concentrated on the continent. So those things that bring us together, they really are points of starting those kinds of discussions of interdisciplinary collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mkonazi, for that. Any other question or comment from the participants? While we're still thinking of some of the questions that we can ask, let me just remind you that after the session is done, you can go back to the RCDMS and complete the feedback survey and just to inform us how you found this workshop. And you can even, on the feedback form, you can even suggest some of the other topics that you want us to cover, and then we can organize the workshops for those. And if you don't complete the feedback survey, you will not be able to get the certificate of attendance. So the certificate of attendance is automatically generated. So the moment you complete the feedback survey, then you can be able to download it. So I'm just going to give also the last round of questions for those who would want to contribute, who have questions. This is the opportunity for us to engage with Dr. Mkonazi.
Is it possible for you to put the link on the chat for the survey?
It is only accessed through the RCDMS.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Any other question? Okay, so Dr. Mkonazi, I'm thinking of a scenario whereby maybe there is a project that is being done, and the people maybe who are leading the projects, maybe they want to bring their students in, because I understand that some of the PhD or masters can be based on projects. So maybe different faculties, someone from the faculty of health sciences and someone from CBE or any other faculty, any other two faculties that can collaborate, and they bring in their students to have like almost the same studies. Let's say maybe they're doctoral students, maybe almost the same studies, but then they have that element of difference because of the different faculties. Maybe someone is focusing on the health sciences perspective and someone is focusing on the education perspective. As in an institution, the same institution, will that be allowed, or that will need to be maybe from different institutions?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question, Koke. So The question is most probably not about being allowed, because it's exercise of academic freedom. Yeah. So in itself, interdisciplinary is a very activist, stance to research. So it's never given to you. You take it, So you've got to have a willing supervisor. So let me give my experience. So I supervise in the Department of Quality and Operations Management. My home department is business management. And, as I've said, that my field is education. So with all of that, what happens is my students do group supervision. We draw on projects that I've done at quality and operations and bring them to business management as well. So one of my students did a study on the sustainability of agricultural cooperatives and how they operationalize cooperative principles. Yeah. So this is a very interesting field, but all I'm saying to your question is this can be done. It does, though, need, academics that understand the value of it all. So why am I doing it? And then once that has been fully understood, then people will actually take it upon themselves to do it. Okay. So if you're doing a study on economics, you would want, to understand the social behavior around that economics phenomenon that you are investigating. So you would bring someone from the either development studies or someone from social sciences or even social work. So I think it's upon every it's upon every supervisor to make sure that your student gets great value out of their study time. Otherwise, we run a risk of, limiting the potential of your master's candidate or your PhD candidate if you take a route of this is the field and this is what the field wants. Then there's no philosophy there, because philosophy says you make sense of complexity and you bring that complexity into some one sensible statement that a person can read and say, I understand the world. But if all that it is, it's, one field, one perspective, it is complicated. We complicate the potential to derive new capacity or knowledge capacity amongst our either masters or PhD candidates.
Thank you for that, Dr. Mkonazi. Any other question? Okay, so in the absence of question, Lawrence, do you want to say something? I see your mic is unmuted.
Not a question basically from my side, but it's just a gratitude from my side to say thank you so much, Dr. Mkwanazi, for giving us such an insightful session on interdisciplinary research. As I always say, that it's always important to overcome existing challenges, with as such as communication barriers or different approaches, may exist, within research, but it's always important to overcome them with effective collaboration and
Thank you.
shared goals. Yeah. So I just encourage to let's continue to embrace in this, interdisciplinary approaches and to also drive meaningful change. But in that regard, thank you so much again, Dr. Mkwanazi. We really, really appreciate your insights, and I'm sure everybody today has definitely taken a thing or two from the presentation. We really do appreciate your expertise on such an important topic. Thank you. That's it from my side.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Definitely, Lawrence, I do agree with you. Thank you, Dr. Mkwanazi, for your insights, and we have definitely learned a lot from this session alone. So, if in the absence of questions or comments, I think we can close the session, and also just to take this opportunity to thank those who have joined the session. I mean, these sessions would not be possible without, your attendance and your contribution. So we truly appreciate you taking your time to join our sessions and contribute. Thank you so much. And Dr. Mkwanazi, many, many thanks for, agreeing to facilitate this session and, for your insights. Thank you so much. And
Okay.
so any final remarks from you, Dr. Mkwanazi, before we close?
No, I was just saying thank you for the invitation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Can I also request that you share the presentation with us, the presentation slides, so that we can also share with the participants and even those who could not join us? I will share the recording with them. And
Sure.
thank you very much, everybody, and have a wonderful day further.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Bye.